let's talk to Chris, who's going to tell us a little bit about our speaker. And I'm excited about this, Chris. Let's hear all about it.
Well, I think lots of us are. As I said to Larry when I emailed him the other day, that gardeners love birds because we live in the garden and birds are in the garden. But I have to say, Larry, that I see the bird behind you and it's black, white, and red. And I see what you're wearing, your North Carolina State University shirts. And you picked that bird because you must be an NC State fan, right? No. Somebody altogether different. And you're just not speaking because you're waiting patiently for me, folks. As I said, we love birds and want to learn more about them. And Larry has been he's the past president of Wake Audubon, and has been in all 7 continents following birds. So his world of birding is far beyond anything I can imagine. I want to know about the birds in my backyard and the birds when I'm walking around my neighborhood. And so we've asked Larry if he would kind of bring his focus in a little closer to home and share with us the birds of Wake County and what birds we might be seeing as they fly through our community, as well as those that stay with us. So I'm just really excited to have you with us today, Larry, and have you sharing with us about the birds of Wake County. I appreciate your being here. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Let's see. There you go. I assume you can all see the screen now. First of all, I'm Lars Zollar. I'm the Educational Outreach Coordinator for Wake Audubon. It's the largest Audubon society in North Carolina, and there are 12 of them. We're very active, and if you want to consider joining, we have monthly meetings the second Tuesday of the month. When we met in person, it was at the North Carolina Museums down in central Raleigh. We also have service projects. We have field trips through Meetup. And the best way to learn about Wake Audubon is go to wakeaudubon.org, and it'll tell you all about it. It has the calendar and all the different things that we do. And we hope that you'll be part of it. A part of what we do, by the way, is advocate for birds. I appreciate you having me here tonight. And as Chris said, we're going to talk about the common birds of Wake County. In other words, birds you would commonly see around your neighborhood. You'd be a lucky person if you saw all the ones we're talking about tonight. And what I've worked out with Paul is that normally this is an interactive program where I'll show you the bird, a description of the bird and how it sounds. And then I'll say, does anybody know this bird? If you're a chatter and you're in the chat box, if you would type in what the bird you think the bird is, I'll hear a couple. It won't be very long because we don't want to draw it out. And if you get it right, great. And if you don't, well, you'll find out what the bird is. I hope you enjoy it. The purpose of this is to get you familiar with putting names to birds that you're seeing, understand more about the bird and about how birds help us and how we could help the birds. So I hope you enjoy it. And there will be a time to ask questions. My favorite one is, what is that bird in my garage and how can I get them out? I'll tell you that at the end of the meeting. Here's the picture of the first bird. There's a lot of them in our neighborhood right now. It's a dark gray back and a brick red breast, and it has a bunch of calls. It's caroling, and it's you'll hear it in the morning all over the place. Does anybody have an idea of what the bird is?
We have 3 votes for robin.
And you would be right. This is a good group. I would think that gardeners would know their birds. Did you know that the American robin is the most common bird found in North America? Up to 520 million robins live across the United States. And right now they're moving their way up north. Some of them have been here all winter. There's like a shift from the north to the south, and some of the Canadian birds overwinter in North Carolina because they think it's warm. You'll often see them standing upright on lawns, And they're very sensitive to chemicals used in your lawn, because if the earthworm or the insect they're pulling out of your lawn has chemicals in it, it gets bioamplified in that bird's body. Okay, this bird you'll hear saying, Peter, Peter, Peter. It's a small gray bird with a tufted crest. Do you know what bird this is?
We have 4 votes, 5 votes for tufted titmouse.
This is a smart group. It really is. It's the eastern tufted titmouse, and it got its name from the fact that it's a mousy gray color. It reminded the early colonists of a bird in Europe called the tit, and it has a tuft, so it ended up being the tufted titmouse. They readily use sunflower seeds from your feeders, and it's important to keep your feeders clean because it protects the birds from disease. Right now, there's some bad news on the feeder front in that the salmonella that's naturally in their excrement is being passed on from bird to bird, and the birds are getting sick from it. So if you're keeping feeders out, make sure they stay clean. This bird. It's a black cap with a white cheek patch and a black throat, and it says, Phoebe, Phoebe. What bird is
Everybody
this?
says chickadee.
Chickadee. Okay, there are 2 kinds, black cap and Carolina chickadee. And around here in our area, you're much more likely, 99%, going to see Carolina chickadee. But if you were to go up to Asheville, you'd have a good chance of seeing the black cap chickadee. It tends to be higher elevation here, and farther north, it tends to be the dominant bird, really, when you get into Pennsylvania. They're often found in mixed flocks with tufted titmice, and bird feeders have been scientifically proven to help chickadees survive in especially harsh winters. But if you think that birds are dependent on your feeders, they're not. Really, you're putting up bird feeders so that you can see birds, and that's great. But be careful on keeping them clean. Look at these 2 birds. It's a twofer. They have something in common. The first bird's slim gray with white wing bars, where the other one's slate gray with a black cap and a chestnut vent. Can you name either of these birds?
We have votes for catbird, mockingbird.
That is excellent. So far, you guys are 100%. If you were in my class, I would be giving you an A+. Now, on chat, can anybody tell me what these 2 birds share as a characteristic?
Let's see. Singing, feathers.
You are right. They're both mimic birds. They're very good at imitating different sounds. I got to go back one. I'm jumping ahead. I had a time where my father, when I lived in Maryland, was complaining about this new thing. He had a cell phone, and he said it didn't work, that it would ring and nobody was on it. And so I was at the pool where he was talking about this, and I heard the phone ring, and he went and picked it up, and he says, see, this damn thing doesn't work. And I said, well, that's fine, Dad, but the phone is ringing over in this bush. And a little gray catbird came out and smiled at us. And one of the big pluses about birds is they eat a lot of insects. And these 2 birds in particular like to nest in thick bushes near your home. I bet you're already starting to know this one.
Yeah.
All red bird with a large
Mr. and Mrs. Cardinal.
Yeah, and a black patch around. And the female isn't near as red and doesn't stand out as much. And so obviously, what are people telling us? Paul?
Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Cardinal.
Yes, absolutely. Now, how do you know? Well, I'm just going to say it and then I'll tell you the answer, because we can't keep doing every response. But how do you know that the female is an adult female and not an immature male or even an immature female? And the answer is, look at the bill. If the bill is bright orange, that's a female cardinal. If it's gray and it's a little bit smaller, when they first fledge, they have a smaller bill, but it gets large enough pretty quickly. It'll be a gray bill. You're looking at the young of the year. So when you're looking at a feeder and a gray-billed cardinal comes, you should be real happy because that represents a young. They have some really varied calls. My favorite is birdie, birdie, birdie. The college kids like the one that goes beer, beer, beer. They'll sing from tree branches near your home if you leave some bare branches. So if it's possible that it doesn't threaten anything, if you leave a dead branch, it's a really good singing perch. A crested bird with a bold white marks on its face and its wings and has a black necklace. It goes J, J, or Keto, 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 Keto. What have we got to vote for?
Blue Jays.
Very good. This group has not missed one yet. Blue jays are very social and they're alert to your presence. That's really helpful. And the blue jays also sound the alarm for other groups. They're not being altruistic. They know if other birds move, it's less likely that the hawk that it might be alerting to is in the neighborhood. Northern migrants replace our local birds during the winter. And if you're in a migration spot like Hawk Mountain, it's something to see 200 blue jays go by all at once. All that blue is something else. And they're crazy for some reason about peanuts. Another blue bird. But this one's blue in the back and the head with an orange breast, and it says, chirwee, chirwee. What do you think it is?
Well, the votes are for Eastern Bluebird.
Oh man, this group, I don't think you're going to get one wrong. Eastern bluebird. They can lay up to 3 clutches in a breeding season, and they nest readily in nest boxes designed for them. If you have a box that has an 1.5 inch hole, that's perfect for a bluebird because it can get in, and one of its main competitors, which is an exotic invasive bird called a starling, can't get in. If I have a bluebird box in my backyard and my wife and I notice that a chickadee is setting up residence, and I know the chickadee and the bluebird don't get along, so I'm debating with her if we should put another piece of wood on the front of the hole that's only 1.25 inches wide, which would accept only the chickadee, and the bluebird, I can put another box up for him. One of the things that if you put up a nest box, you really ought to look at where you place it and if it has a predator guard, because I'd like to think that if you're interested enough on a bird being raised in your yard, that you would really set it up for success. And remember, they'll sometimes do more than 1 clutch in the same year, which is pretty neat. 2 more, it's a double bird. They both have the same last name, but the first one has a black cap with a white face. The second one is smaller with a brown cap. The second bird sounds just like a squeaky duck. You know, from a bathtub, it goes squeaky, squeaky, squeaky. Whereas the first one goes wah, 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 wah. So let's see if we can keep our streak going. What are these 2 birds?
Well, someone who sounds like they know what they're doing has written white-breasted nuthatch and brown-headed nuthatch.
And you are correct. We're still at 100%. Can we keep it going? They are really good at feeding on insects found hiding in the bark. In fact, they're known for crawling up and down the bark. They're really good at it. And I'm always amazed at how many insects they can find in the bark. And you have to think about tree life and how well they do without brown-headed nuthatches taking away those extra insects. And nuthatches are another bird that uses nest boxes real well. If you have an 1.25 inch box, chickadees will use it, but so will brown-headed nuthatches. And in the native plant garden that I maintain inside of a community garden at St. Francis United Methodist Church, I have nuthatch boxes. And one in particular in the native plant garden has fledged young at least once every year. And it's a race against the clock because nuthatches have a natural competitor called the house wren. And the way they work is they start nesting now in early March. And what they want to do is fledge their young before the house wren shows up because the house wren tends to be more aggressive. And every year in mid-April, I'm listening for the house wrens and I'm watching to see if those brown-headed nuthatches can get the young out before the house wren shows up. And they've been successful years in a row. And so I'm feeling really good about it. And they're a great bird. If you see a brown-headed nuthatch, by the way, you're usually going to see it in pine trees. So if you want to put a brown-headed nuthatch box in your house, in your yard, and you don't have any pine trees around, you've set up a really nice chickadee box. Ah, a black and white bird with a little red on the back of its head. And it makes a pick, pick, and it has a whinny call too. This might be a little tougher.
Well, the votes are for a downy woodpecker.
That's right. And if you look around the bill, that's where it got its name. It has some downy feathers around there. And it is the downy woodpecker. And it's quite similar to a larger bird, looks a lot like it, but they're not often found in feeders unless you happen to live in a really good mature woods. And it's able to climb its trees by using the stiff feathers on its tail to brace like in a triangle so that it can drill for insects. So since we're on woodpeckers, let me give you these two. Notice the first one is black and white, like he's wearing a tuxedo with an entirely red head, where the other one has a red toupee and a black and white ladder pattern on the back. The first one is really loud and says queer and meow, where the second one is more of a rattle, like queer and chur. So what do you think?
Well, we got 2 votes for a red-headed woodpecker and a yellow-breasted flicker was 1 vote. Yellow-bellied woodpecker, red-bellied woodpecker, or northern flicker. We got a lot of
within it. You name both the birds. I often have people come and say, "I saw a red-headed woodpecker in my backyard," and they're not as common in North Carolina. They're more common than they are in Maryland. But I'll say, did it have an entirely red head or did it have a red toupee? If it had an entirely red head, it's that gorgeous red-headed woodpecker. If it's got a red toupee and you're lucky, you'll see a faint red wash on the belly, and that's the red-bellied woodpecker. The interesting thing is that over my birding life of, well, I can't say 71 years because, I have to say about 60 years, red-headed woodpeckers have become less common and red-bellied woodpeckers have become much more common. And it's because of the change in composition of our forests. Woodpeckers can absorb the pounding with built-in shock absorbers in their head, and they love old standing dead trees. They often will carve out a hole to nest one year, but they rarely use it the next year. But there's a lot of secondary nesters that will use it. And if you look at a nice old tree, you're going to see a condo of different birds that are using the same tree. They just love it. So if you have a tree on your property that's not threatening you or your property, and you can safely leave it up, you're increasing the diversity of birds in your backyard. Now, I've heard this one already called out, but this is a large woodpecker, one of the larger ones we have. When it flies, it has a very distinctive white rump patch, and it goes wick, 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 and keer. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped the gun. I hope you were thinking northern flicker. Sorry about that. Can't take it back.
That's what the votes were.
Oh, I knew it was. I knew it was. The eastern birds have yellow shafts on their feathers, on their wings, and the westerns have red shafted. They used to be 2 different birds, but they found out genetically they're the exact same bird, just different colors. So they put them together. If you see a woodpecker on the ground, it's almost always a northern flicker because they loved ants. And once again, if you leave a dead snag up, particularly a tall one, flickers love to sing from the top of one of those old dead snags. Two different hawks. The first one is a medium-sized hawk with black and white bands on the tail, and it has red shoulders and red breasts. The second one is a much larger bird, of almost double in size, with a white front, a streaky belly band, and orangish red tail. The immatures on both these birds look decidedly different. And their calls, the first one is a very loud keer, keer, and you often hear them around your house, where if you hear a real high raspy scream, keer, that would be the other bird. So what do we have votes on for these two hawks?
Well, Sandy and Vandy both say red-shouldered hawk and red-tailed hawk.
And you're correct. I'm not surprised. I love talking to groups that love the same things I love. Red shoulders often will nest in a neighborhood. There's ones that nest in the back of my woods every year, but they're more dominant some years because we also have nesting barred owls, and they don't tend to get along very well. And so one year it'll be dominated by the calls of the barred owl. The next year it'll be red shoulders. And it's like every other year. I just don't understand the difference. Red tails are more likely to nest in open country. And for those of you that want to control mice and rats and snakes, hawks are excellent. That's some of their preferred foods. Well, these look a little bit like hawks. The first one is a large bird with brownish tone wings and seen soaring in the air with shallow V. The second one is smaller with white palms. The outer primary feathers are really white. Away from the nest, both these birds are generally silent, but if you startle them, they'll make a hiss that will scare you to death. So what are these valuable birds?
Let's see. We've got some guesses of buzzards, and one person said turkey vulture and black vulture.
Buzzards is the European name for these birds, and turkey and black vultures is the American bird name. Really good. And obviously the thing that they're really good at is removing dead and dying animals, thereby reducing disease. You might wonder how a vulture could eat, kind of half rotten food and not get sick themselves. And part of it is their digestive system is really acidic. But the other is, look at their head. Do you notice that it's free of feathers? They do that because once they've eaten and they have stuff on their head, they go out and bask in the sun, and with no feathers to shield the skin, they can raise the temperature and kill whatever's on their face. Turkey vultures and black vultures are really important for the environment. These two birds are in the same kind of group. The first one, though, is reddish with dark streaks on the side, where the second one is a bright yellow with a black cap and black on the wings. The first one sings a long song, but in it, there always is a weir. That's really important. The second one, my favorite way to tell them from their song is when they sing when they fly, they go potato chip, potato chip, potato chip. So what would these birds be? It's getting a little more difficult.
Well, the votes are for purple finch and goldfinch.
That's really good. But if it was a purple finch, it wouldn't have dark streaking. This is a bird that doesn't actually belong in this area. It was brought over from the West Coast. Its nickname used to be Hollywood finch, but its correct name is house finch. And the American goldfinch obviously is correctly identified. It's easy to confuse it. And by the way, the more advanced answer would be purple finch, except that it has dark streaking. So I'll give you half credits. You're at 99.5 for your score. House finches were introduced from the Southwest, and goldfinches molt into a dull olive brown color in the winter. I often get questions from amateur birders saying, where did my goldfinches go? And who are the birds that took their place? And I'll say, well, they're probably still the goldfinch. And they go, no, no, no. They don't look anything like it. And we describe it and they look it up in the book and they found out that it has a radically different plumage in the winter. It's kind of fun because when they're coming to your feeders in the spring, you can see little patches of gold that show up and you know spring's not far away. This is something to know. I hope we're keeping our cats indoors because cats represent at least 1 million birds a year removed by outdoor cats. It's higher than that. And it's particularly devastating to birds that nest near or on the ground. The one that comes to mind is a wood thrush. They're not doing well. And the primary reason right now is outdoor cats, because they'll find them and they'll eat the birds. And I don't know what they do with the eggs. This is difficult. Now, obviously, you know kind of what the bird is, but the first bird is large and chunky. The second one's identical, but it's smaller and slimmer. Difficult to tell if you haven't been around a bunch of these birds. The first bird goes caw, caw, caw. The second bird has a more nasal sound and goes car, car, or car. And if you ask it if it's the other kind of bird, it'll say uh-uh, uh-uh. Now, I'd be really impressed if you can tell me what these two birds, they're closely related, these birds are.
Well, we've got some disagreeing votes, but we've got we got a lot of things. We've got crow, raven, starling, grackle, turkey crow, blackbird.
Good guesses.
So you can pick out the right answers.
Yeah. Oh, no. In that answer was the American crow and the fish crow. What you call a crow, there's actually two kinds. And the way to tell them apart is the crow you normally see in the winter is American crow. In the spring through fall, you're likely to still see American crows. They're more common, but you'll also see fish crows. And the way birders tell them apart is by their call. If you hear an R sound in it, it's more likely to be a fish crow. And if you want something to hang on to, think of fish and think of the sea and think of pirates going R, R. And there's an R sound in their call where it isn't in the others. That's a difficult one. Now, ravens, the thing that you would look at is even the second bird in that picture. Do you notice the bill is fairly thin? Ravens have a really substantial bill, and we call it like a Roman nose. It's really prominent. And you're likely to see ravens in wilder areas, particularly toward the mountains. It's not impossible to see them here, but not near as likely, unless you're in Baltimore, and the Baltimore ravens do just fine. They're very social and they're very intelligent, and they've adapted very well to living near human populations. The male has a fiery red throat and iridescent green back, and the females lack the fiery red throat, and they don't have the forked tail. Their calls are high and squeaky.
Let's see. Ruby-throated hummingbirds.
That is correct. Okay. They're attracted to flowers for nectar and feed on sugar water feeders, but their diet is 50% arthropods, little teeny insects and spiders. They just love them. I have seen recently people putting out pictures of the Chinese praying mantis, and occasionally they'll hang around a hummingbird feeder and they'll catch and eat parts of the hummingbird. So if you're rooting for the hummingbird, you might want to shoo that Chinese mantis, praying mantis away from your feeder. It's very important, again, to keep the feeders clean and change the sugar water regularly, particularly the hotter and more humid it gets, it can get some pretty bad mold in it. In addition, just keeping the feeders clean is a good idea because If the feeder's clean, the chance of disease goes way down. Huh. A slender bird with a brown-gray body and a long pointed tail with white on the outer tail feathers, and it sings a mournful series of boo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo.
Everyone says mourning dove.
Very good, very good. When I taught middle school, kids would come to me and I said, I heard an owl last night, and it went, they go, boo-hoo-hoo-hoo. I said, well, you heard a bird, but it was a mourning dove. They build some of the crudest nests I've ever seen. If you see eggs on the ground and you see a pathetic nest above, it's probably a mourning dove, but they'll nest a bunch of times. And if you limit how many times and how long you hunt mourning doves, their population does just fine because of their breeding success. Huh. These birds aren't even flying, which is really funny because most of the time they're flying around. A blackish swallow-like bird, often described as a flying cigar when you see it, and it emits a very rapid chittering call. They really like chimneys.
So the votes are barn swallow.
That's really good. That's really good. But if you look at the coloration, it's much sootier than a barn swallow would be. It is a chimney swift.
Oh.
And they have adapted to roosting and nesting in open chimneys instead of the large hollow trees they used to. If you leave the cap off your chimney during breeding season, a family, just a family of swifts will use it. And the more spectacular thing is that when chimney swifts move south, they hang around an area to replenish their food supply so they have more energy. And they'll do massive roosts of 10 to 20,000 birds in some big old chimney. Audubon has chimney swift walks, at least we did, everything is at least we did, where they actually take you up to a parking garage near the old N&O building. And we watch the chimney swifts in September come down into that chimney just at dark. And if you haven't seen it, you really need to. The first bird's a large brown wren with a white eyebrow stripe, and the second one's smaller with kind of olive, it's pretty drab. The first bird often says tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle, where the second one is a really long, rapid gurgle of notes. So what are our votes here?
Well, we've got 2 votes, both say Carolina wren.
Okay, and that first one is a Carolina wren, and the one with it is a house wren. Carolina wrens will hang around all the way through the year. House wrens migrate pretty far south and won't be coming back for another month or so at the earliest. Both prefer to nest in tight cavities, and if you build a loose stick pile in your yard or in the forest, it'll attract wrens because they really like going into tight spots. In the back of my yard, I have a large riverine buffer forest, and I purposely took a few sticks out of my trimmings and built a little teepee that's a dense tangle, and every year a Carolina wren adopts it as his property. This bird is a hooded gray and white bird with outer white tail feathers. Its song is a loose trill, and it makes a very distinctive smack sound as a chip note. Any ideas?
Got a lot of votes for junco.
It is. It's a dark-eyed junco. And this bird is kind of unusual in that they're often called these are often called snowbirds because they show up about the time that it would snow. And climate change is actually impacting their migration patterns. In North Carolina, our juncos, a lot of them are coming from the mountains in North Carolina. So they're not coming from the north, they're just coming down in elevation. And the problem is that these birds are adapted to breed in a certain temperature. And as our temperatures increase, they need to breed farther up the mountain. And if it gets worse and worse, they'll actually end up not having a place to breed in North Carolina. They'll just have to move, their population will move farther north. Ah, now we're into the sparrows. The first one is a medium-sized bird with a long rounded tail and heavy breast strokes. The second one has a fairly clear breast with a white throat and a yellow lure right behind the bill. The first one says sweet, sweet, and then ends with a trill. The second one has a whistle that goes like this. So what do we have for these sparrows?
We just have one guess as to song sparrow.
That is correct. And the one with the white throat is the white-throated sparrow. The white-throated sparrow has a tan and white and a black and white form. And if you plant tight hedgerows of berries and seed plants, it's a magnet for these birds from early fall to up into May. But both these birds go much farther north to breed. Now these are the true swallows. The first one has a deeply forked tail with white spots. The second one is steely blue tinged with green. The first one builds a mud cup nest in barns and under bridges, while the other one nests in tree hollows and nest boxes.
Let's see, we got one guess. It says purple martin.
That's pretty good, but a purple martin, the adult male would be really all the way dark blue purple. And this bird has a brown face. These birds are the barn and tree swallows. They feed on a lot of insects and they remove, they eat them. They're called swallows because they actually catch the bugs on the wing. They don't even slow down. They actually have rictal bristles around their mouth, little hairs that stick out. And it makes the mouth a little wider than it already is when it's flying with its mouth open, and it just hoovers them in as it flies by. They're really helpful for keeping bugs down to a tolerable level. They're much better than electric bug zappers. I'd be impressed if somebody knows this bird. It's dark above and white below with a white band on the tip of the tail. It's one of the flycatchers, and their song is a series of buzzy notes like dee 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 dee. Any idea? It's a pretty tough one.
Yeah, you said it because we don't have any guesses.
Well, that's the first one that you've been completely shut out. It's the eastern kingbird. Its scientific name is Tyrannus tyrannus, and that means that bird pushes around everybody. This flycatcher eats a lot of insects and seems to prefer bees. Pesticide use, particularly insecticides, reduce the insect population, which reduces the kingbird populations. Wow, what a big bird. It's larger than a robin with bright red-brown above and heavy streaking below. It has a series of phrases it uses to imitate other birds, and its call is a harsh jack. Any idea what this bird is?
We've got brown thrasher.
There you go. You're back on the winning streak. It's often seen flying between bushes. It eats cracked corn and it likes suet. It's one of the three mimics. Remember the mockingbird, the gray catbird, and the brown thrasher. The way to tell them apart is mockingbirds you're probably familiar with and sometimes get irritated with because they sing so often. And they usually do things at a certain musical rhythm, and they repeat things 3 times and go on to a new song. Catbirds are much faster, and they often say meow every once in a while, where the brown thrasher sounds like a mockingbird with a sore throat, and it's much more likely to exactly mimic birds it's heard singing around it. And like with all the birds in your neighborhood, if you provide cover, water, and food, you'll encourage this bird to nest in your community. I had one nesting right alongside my driveway last year. Great bird. This is another bird that I really think is misidentified a lot of times. I think people call it a robin. but it's got a black back with a long tail edged in white, and it has a white breast and rufous side. And it sings, "Drink your tea," or its call is a very loud gooey, gooey. Anybody know this bird?
The guesses are eastern towhee.
You guys are great. Eastern towhee is exactly correct. That time where they lumped the red shafted and yellow shafted flickers together, I lost a bird in my life list. But at the same time, what we used to call the rufous-sided towhee got split into the eastern towhee, and out west, the spotted towhee. So I didn't lose any birds. They're often seen scratching through leaf litter for food. And so if you can have a part of your yard where you allow leaves to collect, this helps towhees find their food. And in my backyard, there's a forest that's left alone, and I have a lot of towhees in the neighborhood. Oh, this bird has a bigger head. It's a grayish sparrow size bird without an eye line and no strong wing bars. And it sings its name, Phoebe, Phoebe, over and over.
We have three different guesses,
All right, let's hear them.
but the meadowlark, kinglet, and then a lot of phoebes.
Eastern Phoebe. Yeah. I saw my first really good breeding plumage meadowlark of the spring over near Yates Mill Pond. If you know where that is, it was on the line where all the pigeons usually roost. It has a habit of bobbing its tail. It often nests on ledges on buildings near people. And if you encourage a phoebe to nest near your home, you've got a great insect eater. And this one is a group that there's a lot of them, but this is the one that you'll commonly see get close, particularly come to your feeder. The male, this is yellow-throated with an olive green back and white wing bars. The female is less conspicuous. And the trill, you're hearing it right now, particularly if you're near any pines, is a real musical trill. There's a couple birds that trill, and if you practice, you can tell this bird from the chipping sparrow and the worm-eating warbler. Anybody have an idea? I'd be really impressed if you knew.
We've got two guesses, pine siskin and pine warbler.
And pine warbler is the answer. A pine siskin does have a little bit of yellow on it, and it has that same kind of wing bar, but the wing bars would be yellow. And the streaking on a pine siskin would be really, really apparent, dark, and all over the place. Pine siskins don't make it down to North Carolina most years, but this is an eruption year, and they've been all over the place. And if you're a lister like me, it's really fun that when you go out and you make a list for eBird, that you can add pine siskin to your list for North Carolina. This is a year-round warbler in the pine forest of North Carolina. And if you maintain a pine forest in your community, it attracts pine warblers. In my neighborhood, and yours might be similar, if somebody comes in to remove some trees, and I understand why they would, they often remove pine trees. And the more pine trees you remove, the less likely you are to see this really great warbler. Now, here are the dirty trio, the European starling, the common pigeon, and the house sparrow. All three of these are exotic, which means they were introduced and are considered pests. The main reason why bird lovers aren't really crazy about these birds is they increase competition for birds that are supposed to be here and for nesting. They can use alternate measures to help native birds use as much as possible. Like, for example, take the one down the bottom, the house wren. House sparrows will use a bluebird box, and they'll actually harm the bluebirds and destroy the eggs. So what I'll do, if I'm committed to a bluebird box, if I see house sparrows show up in it, I'll open the box, throw out the nest, hopefully before eggs, and I'll do this 2 or 3 times, and the house sparrow will just give up. And then the bluebirds will come in. But if I have a lot of trouble with the competition between these two birds, what I'll often do is take the box up and put it someplace else. I had that happen at another house I was at, and I just simply moved it to an environmental remediation project I was helping with. And last but not least, I have to give credit to the photographers that were very nice about giving these photographs for free so that you would see these really good birds. Bob Overfelter, Sam Upchurch, and Kevin Kennedy. So at this time, if you'd like, we could have some questions and answers.
Okay, if you want to ask a question on chat, that's okay, or you can unmute yourself and jump in. And I'm going to bring in Chris too, or let's see. How do you discourage hawks from feeding around bird feeders?
They call them bird feeders. The answer is you can make it safer for the birds at your bird feeder by placing your feeders close enough to some place they could dive for cover. You can't make it totally safe, but there are certain birds, particularly sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper hawks, that they eat birds. And so if they find a bird feeder, they're going to say, hey, I'm going to try this feeding spot out. But if you were to have some hedgerow right next to it, birds are always looking for the next hawk that's coming by. And if they see it, they'll dive into that cover and you increase their chances of survival.
Okay. A question asking you to comment on cedar waxwings.
Yes.
I don't know if there's any question other than that. Or if, do you have anything to say about it? Are they common bird?
Cedar waxwings are one of my favorite birds. They're named waxwings because at the end of their wing, they have something that looks like hard wax. It's not actually wax, obviously. They're beautiful birds. I didn't include them in on the talk mainly because of the size, but they you can tell them by the way they fly. They fly in a compact group, and they often will roost up in a tree, resting, looking for a place to eat. Along with robins, they're the bird that you'll see eat the ripe dogwoods berries every year. They also, once they're through their breeding season, they're quite nomadic, where they just go wherever the food is. And so you might see them, you might not. It's one of those birds that if you're looking for it, you can't find it. But as soon as you don't look, a flock comes right by your house.
Okay. Here's one. A flock of buzzards has descended on the rooftops of my neighborhood. What's all that about?
I had somebody write me a question about that just recently. And what you can do about it and what you can't do. Legally, you can't really disturb them, but people can't be held responsible for making a lot of noise. They really don't like a lot of noise. But the two things that would make you wonder why the vultures are there, that might be the answer of how to get rid of them. And I understand, because they can be pretty disgusting if they're living on your house, and they can be destructive too. The first thing is check around your neighborhood. Is somebody putting out dog or cat food outside? Because they might not be feeding just their dog or cat. They might be feeding the vultures. So look for the food source. See if there is a large roadkill somewhere. And if there is, find somebody that will remove it, because they're very attracted to a roadkill. In addition, where are they roosting? If it's not, I doubt that they're roosting for the night on your roof. It's possible, but they're more likely to be nesting in a big old snag. And it might be the solution. It might be that you would remove the snag. If they don't have a good place to roost and they don't have food, they're going to go somewhere where it is better conditions.
Okay. What local birds are endangered?
Oh, that's a good one. Bald eagles. They're not actually endangered. They're threatened. And in fact, even they're moving it down. It's just that their numbers are small enough that if a disease was to go through them, that would be a problem. You could almost say that Audubon did a study, did a mega study on bird population changes over the last 50 years. And they found out that with our changing in climate and the data that shows about birds in general, that in the last 50 years, we had 21 billion birds. Now we have, I think, 13 or 14 billion birds. We've lost 7 billion birds in total in the last 50 years. And it's changing habitat. It's a more difficult environment. If you're a bird that nests right alongside a riverbank, that usually is pretty gentle, but the water volume's increasing, like a spotted sandpiper, nests right alongside the creek. But if this creek that didn't normally flood starts flooding periodically, that's going to drown the eggs. And now the spotted sandpiper is going to be gone from your creek unless you can get the water flow under control. I could talk all night about it, but if you were to say what birds are endangered, a lot of them are endangered. And what you can do is what we were talking about. Are you in your own neighborhood, in your own property, providing food, shelter, a place to nest, and water? That has a lot to do with birds doing better. And if you haven't read the book, Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy, I highly recommend that all of you read that book. It is a really well-written book. I've read several of his books, but this is like the book where he puts it all together in one spot, and it's really worth a read.
Larry, you asked me when you first signed on, what was my most significant bird experience?
Yes.
And I just remembered that last spring, my son Joseph and I were walking at Shelley Lake Park, which is just a small reservoir just north of Crabtree Mall. And there was a bald eagle couple nesting on one tree. And on the other side of the lake, there were 3 great blue heron nests in the top of the pine trees. And it just amazed me that those herons were nesting up on the top of those trees.
Yeah, the herons have been there for years. The bald eagles, or the last couple years, have been there, and they've been pretty successful as long as the weather holds out. The bald eagles by now are probably feeding the nestlings real rapidly. And it is really cool. If you really look, Shelley Lake, Lake Lynn, Jordan Lake has a lot of bald eagles. Harris Lake right now has got a lot of gulls and coots and a lot of different ducks. There's a lot of good places to see birds and see them being supported. But
Okay.
Shelley Lake is pretty special.
A question on bluebirds. Should the box be cleaned between every clutch or just at the end of the season?
There's a research is 50-50 on that. I tend to say leave the box alone. You might want to make a quick look at it. And if it has some obvious parasites, like little bugs, it might be well to remove the nesting material, because they'll put new nesting material in. Also, there's a school of thought that says that as they add more and more sticks to the nest, it gets the chicks closer to the entrance hole, which is less safe. My bluebird box, I don't do anything to it once the nesting season starts. But in about September, where I'm sure there's no re-nesting, the first thing I'll do is put on plastic gloves and scatter the material out in my forest, sweep it out, and leave the door open for a week or so to let it really air dry. And then I'll close it up, because during the winter, there's a lot of bluebirds that'll use bluebird boxes for a bunch of them roosting in one box to stay warm. In addition, if you haven't actually got your Bluebird box going, I can give you a neat trick. Get a bar of ivory soap and open the box up. I assume there's no birds inside, and soap the bottom of the roof. And you do that because the waxy coating that you're putting on the roof will make it really hard for wasps to attach their wasp nest to the top. And if you've ever opened up a Bluebird box and surprised a nest of wasps, you would really appreciate that hint.
Very good. Okay, we got more questions. What can I do about feral cats that wander through my yard?
Not a lot. There is a device that is motion sensing, that is a sprinkler. And when it sees something walking through the yard, in this case, a cat, it goes off and it starts a sprinkler for a couple minutes. And cats really don't like being sprayed with water. That would work. In addition, if you have a good rapport with your neighbors that have the cat, you could say, I'd appreciate it if you keep your cat indoors, but I like cats, but I don't like them eating the birds. And but I also recognize that you got to live with your neighbors. I also would like to tell you that if you have an opportunity to not support trap, neuter, and release cat colonies, please do that, because trap, neuter, and release is bad for the cats, and it's really bad for the birds.
Okay.
Larry, Paul, can I ask?
Sure, Eddie.
Yeah, I don't know how to type this. Larry, I got a question for you. I love birds. I work for the power company, but I lose a lot of seed on the ground. I know there's a lot of feeders down there that the guys like to feed off of. Mm-hmm. And I lose a lot of seed, but I also bought something called the Songbird Essential Seed Hoop. Do you recommend that to catch a lot of the seed?
Yes, but make sure that you have a mental inventory of when the seed gets wet. And after a day, if the seed's been wet, you might want to remove the seed. That's why I always recommend removing seed from the ground, that when you fill the feeders, rake under the feeders to get rid of the moldy bird seed. When I was feeding birds, and I really fed birds for a long period of time, I'm a recovering bird feederaholic.
Me too.
I used hull-less bird seed. I got it from Wild Bird Center, and it doesn't have the husk. And what I liked about it, it made for a much cleaner feeder, because the bird seed that fell to the ground was ready for the picking, and the birds that didn't want to come onto a perched feeder would just gobble up what was on the bottom. And when I was using no mess blend, I didn't have a cleanup problem at all.
One question I got, I thought my woodpeckers and stuff love sunflower seeds. Is that not good for them?
No, it's good for them.
Okay,
I tell you,
shells.
if they really like suet, because see, they're insect eaters, so they're not big on carbs. They're really big on oily proteins, and that's where suet feeders come into play. If you have hulled sunflower seeds, they'll gobble them up. It's like, for example, Carolina wrens hardly ever come to a feeder, but they came to my feeders because they didn't have to hack the seed apart, which was difficult for them. But chickadees and titmice and cardinals are just great at cracking the seeds.
Well, thanks, Larry, and thanks, Paul.
Okay, we got a couple more questions on bird feeders. I'll ask them together so you can comment. Birds have been coming to my feeders, but then sharp decline. Cleaned feeders put out new feeds, still not much traffic. And the second one, with salmonella, don't we have to remove our bird feeders? I read somewhere we need to disinfect and take them down for 3 or 4 weeks. I would miss them so much.
Yes.
If you comment.
This is the perfect time, by the way, to take your feeders down, because there's a lot of insects coming out. There's a lot of seed being produced. Birds would do without your feeders, period. So if you're taking them down and you're worried that the birds are going to starve, they're not going to starve. The reason we have bird feeders up because we like to see the birds, and that's great. But I would agree with the people that are asking all of us to take our feeders in, really clean them, and leave them out. I mean, don't put them up again for another 3 weeks, because the salmonella outbreak this year has been pretty bad. And well, I'm not going to you can't talk to me just straight out. But the reason I think that the salmonella has been so bad this year is because it's been so rainy. And you combine clumping seeds and bird fecal matter, and you've got a salmonella and conjunctivitis outbreaks that will really decimate bird populations. So if we love our birds and we want to see our birds, well, how about for 3 weeks we don't feed them so that they can be healthier? Normally I wouldn't say that, but I would say that this year.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations to prevent birds from flying into my windows?
Yes. If you were to Google it on Audubon, they have videos and a lot of different things that'll tell you how to keep birds from hitting your windows. My suggestion would be, if you have bird feeders and that's where they're coming from to hit your feeders, like a hawk comes by and they're all panicking, and the bird doesn't understand windows, so he flies into what he thinks is open space and he conks his head. If you put the bird feeder closer to the window, they can't get the speed necessary to knock themselves out. You know, a lot of times when you see a bird kind of be stunned and then eventually fly off and you go, oh, he was great. I think the statistics say that about 70% of the time, the bird's going off and the cerebral hemorrhage that has occurred because their heads are so thin will eventually have them, just like if we had a cerebral hemorrhage, they'll die. So keep them close, but there are ways to make your windows less attractive. In my house, I have windows that have built-in lattice, squares and everything. And that, along with the fact that very few of my windows have a clear shot to the back window, I very rarely get any kind of collisions, and I have a lot of birds in my yard. I also have plantation blinds on my house, and my wife and I keep them down but open. You know what I mean? They're so you can see through, and that additional set of lines, the bird sees that as not capable of flying through. And so they don't try to fly through my windows because they can see the blinds and they can see the lattice work. We're just lucky that way, but if you really want to know more, there are lots of ways you can do it. There's things that you can put onto your window that you could still see just fine, but the birds could see that pattern and keep from flying into the window. I really do recommend the Audubon site to talk. Just Google Audubon window collisions, and they have a really good explanation.
Okay, let's see. We've got some comments, but we want to make sure we get the name of that book. It was Nature's Best Hope by Tallamy.
Yes, Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy. Let's see. Oh, I got it right here.
That was magic. You just pulled it out of the swamp.
And there it is. See the bird?
Yeah.
Obviously, the background's the wrong color, but it's called Nature's Best Hope, A New Approach to Conservation That Starts in Your Yard by Douglas W. Tallamy, Tallamy. I really like the book.
Okay. Well, I think we're getting close here. Chris, can you start your video to say good night?
Okay, I'm clicking on it right now. Well, Larry, you've been everything I'd hoped for and more. So thank you very much for making time for us. This was just great. I really appreciate your being with us tonight. If I can, on your time, take 1 minute to do a little advertisement for next month.
Sure.
One of our new members is Tom Packer, and he's going to be talking with us next month. He is a master gardener, and he's going to be taking a lot of our questions. So club members, if you're like me and you have a question that's been bugging you and you just haven't gotten your act together to type it into the master gardeners, if you will send your question and a picture or two to Tom, he's in our new book, and he's right down there in the corner of my screen right now, Tom Packer. He will actually address your questions, our questions, my question next month, in addition to sharing with us some of the fascinating questions that master gardeners receive, because he's been on their master gardener call answer list thingy for a goodly long while. So that's next month. But back to you, Larry, again, just thank you so much. You've been wonderful. I'm going to ask you one more question, if I may. And my whistler hasn't been working very well, but when I walk in the morning, I hear a bird. I'm going to try to do this and not embarrass myself. Now I'm going to laugh because I'm embarrassing myself. I'm going to try it. Nope, didn't work. Am I getting it? Is it coming through at all?
Yes, I heard it.
What is that?
It was a good call, and it does sound really familiar. There's a couple birds. It could be one of the calls of the tufted titmouse.
Okay.
It could be a robin. A robin has a lot of varied calls.
Okay. Well, I often hear it in my morning walk. And as a kid growing up, that was my mother's signal. She wanted our attention. And so when I was raising my kids, that was my call to my kids. I wanted their attention. So now when I'm walking along and I hear it, I think my mom is calling me up in heaven. She must be reaching me. So anyway,
Chris?
yes.
Chris?
Yes,
It's
Jim.
a cuckoo. It's a cuckoo bird.
Are you kidding me,
It's a
Jim?
cuckoo bird.
You are just pulling my tail, my feathers. You're pulling my feathers there, Jim.
Well,
Again.
I tell you, get the call for the yellow-billed cuckoo that's not up here yet.
Okay.
It's a summer bird, and it has the craziest call you ever heard.
Yellow-bellied cuckoo.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be the one you just described, because first of all, it's not here yet.
Okay. And I think Jim wouldn't spare me. I mean, he would embarrass me further in public. But again, Larry, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. And it was really great to see how much members already know. And yet you also answered a lot of questions and clarified things for us. And so we now have a great spring and a great summer to look forward to more birding. So thank you so much for your time.
Well,
And
thank
now,
you for having me. And if you'd like me to come back another year, we have a lot of different talks.
Well,
And,
you know what? We will remember that.
And also, those of you that love birds and want to do things for birds and learn more about birds, go to wakeaudubon.org, because it's a great group. If you like birds, you're going to find your church, because we all love birds at Wake Audubon.
We'll find kindred spirits there. Well, thank you again so much, Larry. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.